10 years after Harriet told me my premature daughter was not worth saving, my phone rang. It was Harriet, the same woman who had heard that Everly was fighting for her life in the NICU. The same woman who had asked why we should waste money on a baby who might not survive. Now she needed money. A lot of it. She called it a family loan. She reminded me that family was supposed to help family. I listened quietly, because 10 years earlier, I had stood beside my daughter's incubator, taken off my wedding ring, and sold it just to buy Everly more time. Harriet had made her decision then. Now the decision was mine. Before that phone call, I had spent years learning how to survive Harriet. She was my husband's mother, and she had a talent for turning criticism into family advice. My cooking was never good enough. My clothes were too plain. She constantly reminded me that I was not quite what she had imagined for her son. My husband, Callister, usually stayed quiet whenever she crossed a line. His parents were financially comfortable. Wendell had built a successful insurance brokerage, while I worked as a payroll coordinator and Callister worked as a warehouse supervisor. We were comfortable until I was 26 weeks pregnant. My water broke without warning. Within hours, I was in the hospital, terrified. Our daughter, Everly, was born weighing just 1 pound 11 ounces. She was so tiny I could hold her in the palm of my hand. Her lungs were underdeveloped. She had a heart murmur, and machines surrounded the incubator where she fought to stay alive. For 11 days, I could not even hold her. I could only reach through the incubator and touch her tiny hand. Then the bills started coming. Our insurance covered only part of her treatment, and the medical expenses eventually climbed beyond $200. We needed help. My parents did what they could. My mother even flew in and stayed beside me in the NICU. Then Callister called his parents. I stood beside him as he explained that Everly was critically ill and that we were struggling with the bills. There was a long silence. Then Harriet said, "She's too weak to survive anyway. Why waste the money?" I went completely still. My daughter was fighting for her life a few feet away, and her grandmother had already decided she was not worth the expense. I waited for Callister to defend his daughter. He said nothing. That silence hurt almost as much as Harriet's words. Wendell eventually joined the conversation and refused to help as well. Later, I learned they were not actually struggling financially. But that night, I stopped expecting anyone to save us. I looked at my wedding ring. It represented a marriage I thought would protect my family. But it could also buy something Everly desperately needed: time. So I took it off and sold it for $1. Every dollar went toward my daughter's care. Everly remained in the NICU for 91 days. There were setbacks, terrifying nights, and bills that seemed impossible to escape. I took freelance bookkeeping work. I negotiated payment plans. I sold whatever I could. When Everly finally came home, weighing 5 pounds 3 ounces, I should have felt nothing but relief. Instead, I realized something else had changed. My daughter had survived, but my marriage was falling apart. Callister visited Everly and worked overtime, but whenever I mentioned his mother's words, he minimized them. She didn't mean it. You need to let it go. Then I learned Wendell had given Callister $4,000 toward a used truck while I was still struggling with Everly's medical expenses. That was when I understood. They had not been unable to help. They had simply decided where their money belonged. And Everly was not on that list. 18 months after Everly was born, I asked Callister one final time to establish a boundary with his mother. He told me I was still holding on to something that had happened a long time ago. For months later, I filed for divorce. There was no dramatic confrontation. I simply stopped waiting for him to become the husband and father I needed. I moved into a modest apartment with Everly and started rebuilding. I worked full-time. I took freelance clients at night. I went back to school and finished my accounting degree. Then I sat for the CPA exam. I passed. Eventually, I became a senior accountant and started my own bookkeeping and tax practice. At first, it was barely a business. It was just me working long hours. while helping Everly with homework at a folding table in a rented office. Then the clients came. I hired my first employee. I bought a home. I paid down the debt from those brutal years. And Everly grew into a bright, healthy girl with dreams of her own. The little girl Harriet had dismissed became a teenager who loved dinosaurs, then space, then competitive swimming. Meanwhile, Harriet and Wendell remained outside our lives. For years, they seemed to have escaped every consequence. Then Wendell's insurance brokerage collapsed. Their comfortable life began disappearing. Their house was expensive, medical costs were rising. And their retirement was not what they had expected. I heard about it through Callister. I did not celebrate. By then, I no longer needed anything from Harriet or Wendell. Not their approval. Not their money. Not even an apology. I had spent 10 years building a life that did not depend on them. Then Harriet called. The first 2 times, I ignored her. On the 3rd call, I answered. Her voice sounded different. Smaller. Less certain. She explained what had happened to Wendell's business. She talked about their mortgage, medical expenses, and financial problems. Then she asked me for a loan, just until things stabilized. And then she said the words I knew were coming. Family helps family. I closed my eyes. 10 years earlier, family had been asked to help when her granddaughter was fighting for her life. Harriet had decided it was not worth the money. Now she was asking me to do exactly what she had refused to do. I could have reminded her about the hospital, the wedding ring, the truck, everything I had sacrificed. Instead, I told her I needed time to think. For 3 days, I thought about that NICU room, Everly's tiny hand, the machines keeping her alive, and the moment I realized I could not wait for other people to decide whether my daughter was worth saving. Then I called Harriet back. She answered immediately. I said, I won't be giving you or Wendell the money. Silence. She tried to explain. She said she had been scared back then. She said she had not known what would happen. She said everyone makes mistakes. Then she reminded me that she was still Everly's grandmother. I answered quietly. That fact did not seem to matter when Everly was fighting for her life. Harriet became defensive. Then she repeated the same argument. Family helps family. And suddenly, the irony was impossible to miss. 10 years earlier, Harriet had decided that financially helping my daughter was not worth the sacrifice. 10 years later, she needed financial help from me. I had the money. I could give it to her. I chose not to. That was the checkmate. I did not insult her. I did not threaten her. I did not try to destroy her life. I simply refused to rescue people who had already shown me what their version of family looked like. I told Harriet I hoped they found a way through their situation. And I meant it. Then I ended the call. For the first time, I understood that I had already won years earlier. Not when Harriet needed money. Not when Wendell's business collapsed. I won when I stopped needing their approval. Years later, Everly finally asked why she barely knew her paternal grandparents. I told her the truth. The phone call, the incubator, the wedding ring, the 91 days, the divorce, the years of rebuilding. She listened quietly. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't need them, she said. You just needed you. I smiled. She was right in the way that mattered. I had needed doctors, nurses, my mother, people who showed up. But I had never needed the approval of people who decided my daughter's life was not worth fighting for. Everly asked whether I regretted selling my wedding ring. I told her no. That ring represented a marriage. The marriage ended. But the choice I made with that ring lasted forever. I chose my daughter. And I would make that choice again. Because the real victory was never Harriet losing. It was Everly surviving, growing up, thriving, and knowing without question that her mother believed she was worth fighting for. Sometimes justice does not mean destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it means becoming so independent that their approval no longer matters. And when they eventually come back expecting you to save them, you finally have the freedom to say no. Everly had always been worth fighting for. And after 10 years, Harriet finally had to live with the fact that the woman she once dismissed was strong enough to walk away without her.